One of the strangest and at the same time most hilarious things about politics in America is how one side versus the other is treated by the press. And over the past few days, there could be an argument made that Jen Psaki is not getting her Democrat privilege card recognized. She seems a little salty.
Going to the emails with Dr. Fauci, there was an exchange between Dr. Collins and Dr. Fauci referencing a Fox News report discussing it as basically the lab leak as a conspiracy. Collins denied, jumping to conclusions, and he asserted that his mention of conspiracies was referring to the rumor that the virus was bioengineered as a weapon. Is that the position of the administration and their top health experts, that this was not engineered, or is that still an open question and part of this review?
Well, I think we've spoken to this pretty extensively from here. Let me just say on Dr. Fauci and his emails, he's also spoken to this many, many times over the course of the last few days, and we'll let him speak for himself. And he's been an undeniable asset in our country's pandemic response. But it's obviously not that advantageous for me to relitigate the substance of emails from 17 months ago.
Okay, notice what she says there. It's not advantageous. So as in it doesn't directly benefit her to rehash these emails from 17 months ago, making it seem like, oh, remember, this was the last administration, overlooking the fact that, of course, we're talking about Dr. Fauci. Let's continue.
We've launched, based on the president's direction, an entire internal review process to use all of the resources across government to get to the bottom of the origins. And that's a 100-day process, and we'll look forward to providing more on that, or 90 days, sorry, when it's concluded.
Can you speak at all to the Vanity Fair report about this State Department fact sheet that came out 5 days before inauguration?
5 days before this president's inauguration?
Correct.
Let's look into that. So, Vanity Fair came out with a report, and in the report, several State Department staffers say they were warned against probing into the origins of the CV. Thomas Donano, former acting assistant secretary of the State Department's Bureau of Arms Control and Verification and Compliance, told Vanity Fair that the warning smelled like a cover-up. Vanity Fair cited a 5-page January 9 memo in which Donano outlined apprehension and contempt from State Department technical staff and a complete lack of responses to briefings and presentation. Donano's memo also said that State Department staffers warned leaders in his bureau not to pursue an investigation into the origins of the CV because it would open a can of worms if it continued, according to Vanity Fair. A total of 4 ex-State Department officials described being warned against probing the lab leak theory of the pandemic and repeatedly advised not to open up the Pandora's box, the magazine said. Wow.
If there was any crossover of that, how that was seen by this administration, the conclusions that they were trying to put out in the final days of the Trump administration.
I think I'm just going to focus on our own internal review that's going to use every resource in the federal government, whether that is our health experts, our medical experts, our national security team, to see what more we...
Again, the WHO is investigating this. The Biden administration is leaning heavy on the WHO. The head scientist of the investigative team is a man by the name of Peter Danzek, and he is also one of the bigger players in a company called Eco Health Alliance that was involved in getting grant money from the National Institute of Health through Dr. Fauci and others to do what is arguably gain-of-function research in North Carolina and in the Wuhan lab. Now, the position of the National Institute of Health and Dr. Fauci and of Peter Danzek is that the research they were doing in Wuhan is not gain of function. And if you listen to the letter of the words that he says of what research he was doing there, I don't see how it could be misconstrued as anything else but that. Now, I've covered that, but only in a video that I've released on BitChute and Rumble because I can't talk about that subject in detail here. But suffice it to say, the fox is guarding the hen house, and he's already stole a couple of chickens. It's like the fox is the police that show up too. They're foxes too. So, or what are foxes? Swifts?
Jen, would the president support a commission to investigate the initial U.S. response to COVID-19?
A commission in Congress?
Or a presidential commission?
I would say if members of Congress have a discussion and want to have a discussion about that, we're happy to hear from them. But our focus right now, as you know, Peter, is on our own internal investigation, or our internal process, I should say, using all of the resources of government, tapping into our data and science experts to see what more we can determine over the next 90 days or less than 90 days about the origins of the pandemic.
Mike Pompeo is now saying that when he was the Secretary of State and he was trying to investigate the origins of COVID-19 there, the NIH folks were trying to suppress what he was doing. So is there any concern from the White House that there may have been people at the NIH who are making policy decisions based not in science, but based on their personal political beliefs or preferences?
Well, I really don't have any analysis of the last administration's working.
People are still over there. And
Again, the last administration, she keeps saying that as if they interchanged the bureaucracy in between Trump and Biden, which of course we've gone into detail on this channel. They haven't. You know what? For the first time, it just struck me that one of the main videos I made on that was actually removed recently. So maybe I can't say that we've gone into detail on that on this channel, but on BitChute it's there.
you see how they operate.
Here's what we know, Peter. We know that Dr. Fauci and many members of the NIH team, medical and science experts, because of their work over the last 10 years, we have developed a focus and effort and apparatus to fight this pandemic, and we are grateful to them for their work. Everybody wants to get to the bottom of the origin. Former Secretary Pompeo, President Biden, Democrats and Republicans across the board.
Remember, we've had hundreds of thousands of Americans killed and countless people out of work, lots of challenges all across the world, millions of people dead as a result of the fact that the Wuhan virus spread from the Chinese Communist Party's cover-up. And we know a lot about its origins, but we don't know the answer. And we have to make sure we get that answer. It has to be bipartisan in doing so. We have to get that answer, because if we don't, that virology lab is still up and running. It's still probably conducting the same kinds of research it was conducting that may well have led to this virus escaping from that laboratory. Only the Chinese Communist Party knows the answer. They deserve, the world deserves to know the answers, and they have to tell us. I hope that there will be a bipartisan push to demand and hold accountable the Chinese Communist Party until it tells the world how this virus got out of Wuhan. You know, I've known since spring of last year in 2020, when I first spoke about this, that there is enormous evidence that this escaped from that laboratory in Wuhan. We know that there were people who got sick there, scientists who got sick there. We know that they were doing this gain-of-function research, essentially taking viruses and making them more contagious, potentially more lethal. We know those things to be true. So what I can say for sure is this. We know that they were engaged in efforts that were connected to the People's Liberation Army inside of that laboratory. So military activity being performed alongside what they claim was just good old civilian research. They refused to tell us what it was. They refused to describe the nature of either of those. They refused to allow access to the World Health Organization when it tried to get in there. That cover-up alone suggests that there's a lot more that we need to know. And this bioactivity, this biosafety work that has to go into any lab that's engaged in this kind of viral research is something I have no confidence in whatsoever.
We all share a concern about the challenge, and that is the intransigence at times by the Chinese in providing data and providing information.
China is going to eat our lunch? Come on, man. I mean, they're not bad folks, but guess what? They're not they're competition for us. I've spent more time with President Xi of China than any world leader has. He firmly believes that China, before the year 3035, is going to own America, because autocracies can make quick decisions.
We share agreement on that. We all want to get to the bottom of what happened here.
And you mentioned Dr. Fauci. There have been these emails that have come out through a FOIA request that make it seem like we knew that he had his hands full at the time trying to figure out what to do. But it seems like there were times that he was saying one thing in email and then coming to this microphone and saying something else. If that is the case, and if that affected the U.S. policy posture at the time, should he be held accountable?
Well, I've talked a little bit about Dr. Fauci, and Dr. Fauci has been out doing several interviews himself and answering questions on these emails and questions that you all may have. Dr. Fauci is a renowned public servant.
What she's saying is Dr. Fauci has gone out on his own media blitz to, accept responsibility for this and to divert attention elsewhere. And she's about to call him a civil servant. Now, Dr. Fauci, it makes something like $400,000 a year. He's the highest paid bureaucrat in the national government, if I remember correctly. Is that civil service to you, or is that an overreaching bureaucracy, a completely unearned salary by a bureaucrat who got almost everything incorrect?
Well, I've talked a little bit about Dr. Fauci, and Dr. Fauci has been out doing several interviews himself and answering questions on these emails and questions that you all may have. Dr. Fauci is a renowned public servant, civil servant, I should say, career civil servant. He's overseen management of multiple global health crises, and the attacks and attacks launched on him are certainly.
Yeah, multiple health crises is as in he was there during the HIV/AIDS epidemic that they did not remove from my channel. Dr. Carrie Mullis had everything in the world to say about Anthony Fauci and what his involvement was in all that insanity back then. And if you want to know just how crazy it all is, look into Anthony Fauci and the drug AZT, a drug that had been around for some while but hadn't been approved for any of the diseases it had been made for. And so the medical establishment was looking for something to use this stockpile, this back stockpile of this failed medication. And they found another something that they could use it for just before they had to pitch it all in the bin. What a coinky dink.
Something we wouldn't stand by. I understand there's interest in the emails. He's answered a lot of questions on the emails. I don't think I'm going to have much more to add on them from here.
Do you think the attacks are political against Dr. Fauci?
I'm going to let Dr. Fauci speak to his own defense of his emails from 17 months ago before this president even took office.
Okay, and then finally.
So that is distancing, in case obviously, people who are watching my channel, that you guys know. But that she's distancing from that question. She's not going to say anything about that. We're leaving Dr. Fauci to answer that. We're going to let him out on his own because we already know that the media is going to handle him with kid gloves and he'll be just fine. We're not going to back him in any way, shape, or form because we are not willing to give away any political capital to Dr. Fauci, but they don't have to because Dr. Fauci has enough of his own political capital to survive this storm.
Does President Biden have a position on gain of function research?
Well, we have not, as Dr. Fauci has actually said repeatedly, we've never approved any funding for gain of function.
That has nothing to do with the T in China or the CV in China. The question is, does he approve of it or not? Because remember, it was banned, and somehow when it was banned in the US, even though Fauci and others definitely supported doing it, there was a movement in the scientific community that got it banned from being done at places like Fort Detrick, where they had a couple of leaks, and that was, not good, no bueno. So it got stopped from being funded here on U.S. soil, and then magically, that's how EcoHealth and Peter Danzig et al. Got their funding moved to Wuhan, where they did work on CVs from bats that they claim today it was not gain of function.
Research in Wuhan. I know that's, I think, why you're asking the question. I believe some may have been approved, or there was funding approved during the prior administration. There's a framework, I should say. This is not meant to be a criticism of funding and how it's approved through different NIH programs.
So there was research approved during the prior administration. And of course, again, the entire response to this topic has been distance. And she has distanced the Biden administration very well from this entire thing. And at the end of the day, leaving Fauci out to dry is the best political play that they can make.
But I would send you to them to give more of an explanation of the funding mechanism.
And just since you mentioned Dr. Fauci again, can you imagine any circumstance where President Biden would ever fire him?
No. Go ahead.
Now, that is probably the most dramatic thing that Peter Doocy got out of her this entire series of questions, because how quickly no came out of her mouth. And he didn't label it like if something came out about gain of function or if something came out that he was doing X, Y, or Z. This woman said no to, could the president imagine any circumstance whatsoever where he would fire Anthony Fauci? And she says, no. Next question. Now, guys, a lot of people are angry about the missed calls and the politics that he played, this entire situation, and rightly so. And one of the most frustrating things about it is that probably at the end of the day, nothing will happen. And, most people won't even do the work to find out what we're talking about. And that's kind of how it goes. You can just file those Fauci emails up on the shelf next to Clinton emails. And so that's the reality. But it's pretty amazing to me how the Biden administration just leaves him out to dry. They are just, all they say is, yeah, well, this happened years ago during the prior administration. And normally that would really hurt somebody, but Fauci has so much political clout that the media won't push him on it. And the Biden administration, I don't even know what to say, man. It's pretty wild. There's nothing that man could do to get fired by President Biden. Nothing imaginable. And the way that she said that so quickly means that they've talked about, the possibility of her being asked questions about him and about this. So that's like the stance that they wanted to take. I'd say probably there's a whole lot wrong with the government, obviously, but one of the biggest ones, people talk about it in all kinds of different ways, like term limits and such like that. But one of the biggest ones is how when people get into government, they work to make it impossible for people to get fired from government, who, of course, is themselves. And it's just self-preservation, and it's human instinct. But after decades of it, you end up in this position where, like, pretty much all public service positions are, like, unfireable positions. Anthony Fauci makes $400,000 a year doing what he does, being wrong habitually, and he's a bureaucrat. Makes more than a president. Don't even get me started comparing it to salaries of United States citizens. It's pretty unbelievable, right? There's not a single way Anthony Fauci gets fired.
You mentioned Dr. Fauci again. Can you imagine any circumstance where President Biden would ever fire him?
No. Go ahead.
Just